Good evening, everybody.
Great to see everyone. Well, not that I can see anyone,
No,
but
you
it's so
can't.
wonderful that you're joining us wherever you are for this evening together, Jesus, Loss and me.
Yeah, I'm Georgie.
Wonderful. I'm Niv. I'm currently coming to you from London from my mum's study, which is a whole lot nicer than any study I've ever had. And I'm really looking forward to this evening. Georgie, where are you based?
I'm in my own study currently, and I'm trying to get this plant in view, but it's like, because a plant makes everything look better, doesn't it? But yeah, this is our office, and I'm coming from Stoke-on-Trent in the middle of England. So this event's been put on by Passion for Evangelism, and if you've never heard of Passion for Evangelism in your life, then the aim is to just empower women to introduce the good news of Jesus to their friends, family, and even strangers. So if you don't call yourself a woman, or even if you don't call yourself a Christian, you're really, really welcome. This event tonight is for everybody, and we're so glad that you're listening in or watching in either live or later on. So today is National Day of Reflection. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that unless you've not left the house all day or listened to the radio or TV. And I had a good cry today, Niv. I'm just going to put that out there. I saw a post from a nursing home that was sharing pictures of residents they'd lost over the last 12 months, and just going through all their faces, it really hit home to me that every statistic is a person that had a family, and had a good cry. I let it all out. I felt better. And I say that to say that, at the risk of sounding like Channel 4, this program tonight is going to perhaps trigger some trauma or some emotion in you, and it's important that we say that. It's not going to be like an easy watch for some of you possibly, but I would just say that carry on, carry on with us, and be prepared that some of the themes we're going to touch on, we're talking about loss. It's been 12 months of incredible loss on all sorts of levels. And I'm sure that you, whoever you are and wherever you're watching from, have lost something in the last 12 months or someone. So if it gets emotional, and if you do need to switch off at some point and come back to it later, that's absolutely fine. But I would just say that sometimes it's good to cry. It's good to stop and to take stock, which is really what today is all about, of the magnitude of what we've been through in the last 12 months and how heavy it really has been. So what's it going to look like tonight, Niv?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Like you say, it's going to be an opportunity for us to hear stories of loss from three speakers who are sharing what they've experienced. Thank you so much for everything you just said, Georgie, because I think you're absolutely right. The plan this evening is to be real about what we've experienced, and not do what I find so easy to do most of the time, which is to basically pretend that nothing gets to me.
Keep calm and carry on.
Absolutely. Put on some kind of mask to convince the world I'm doing fine. Well, tonight we don't want to be wearing any masks, and we have three speakers who'll be sharing their own experience of loss. So we're going to be hearing tonight from Marina, and then from Leah, and then from Graham as they speak. Each will be speaking for something like, I suppose, 15 minutes. Each will be sharing something well worth hearing about what they've been through and also what they've discovered in Jesus from that. And then at the end, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. So please, all the way through tonight, get typing your comments and your questions. We'd love to see them, and keep thinking throughout about anything you'd like to ask that the speakers can address.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes you can think, oh, I'll hold that question till the end. And then at the end, it's totally gone and you have no idea what your question was. So do just put it in the chat as it comes to you. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Marina. And Marina is Central Regional Coordinator of IFES in the Ukraine. Marina, you're really welcome. And I will hand over to you now.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Marina, and I am from Ukraine, from Kiev. And as I was suggested to share the topic about loss, is all lost? Is there any hope? I was thinking that that's going to be an uneasy but very important topic to talk about, because many have lost much over the last year. Their business, jobs, probably family members, friends. And it seems that year 2020 was one of the darkest darkest times over the years. It started off with a terrible bushfire in Australia. Then the COVID-19 pandemic started, that impacted almost 30 million people. Economies around the world collapsed. Natural disasters followed in different parts of the globe. And also in Ukraine, we had big fires in many villages. And one of my friends had a big family, and they just escaped from the fire as the fire came into the village, and the whole big and beautiful house that they've built, it was destroyed, it was damaged, and they tried to find a shelter where to go. And there is a question that people ask: is all lost? Is there any hope? And this is a question that I asked myself as well. 12 months ago, my mom was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she needed urgent operations. It started from just terrible headaches. She started forgetting things like the password of cards, telephone numbers. That was very untypical of her, because she always had the best memory of all of my family. And when we realized that something was wrong, and she started feeling worse, we helped her to be hospitalized. Doctor says that she had a brain tumor, and she needed an urgent operation. However, all the medical examinations stopped because of the COVID and because of the lockdown. All the hospitals and institutions were closed. And it miraculously, so we found a surgeon who agreed to remove the brain tumor of my mom in a private hospital. However, after the operation, we got the final diagnosis that the tumor was cancerous, and that my mom is left to live 3 to 5 months. It was very heartbreaking to hear and to realize that nothing was possible to prevent the cancer. We were grieving, we were crying, and then we realized that the rest of time enjoying the presence of my mom, we want to spend remembering our life together. So we gathered with family, we talked together, we remembered different parts of our life. And one of the brightest memories that I have from the childhood is that that my family went to Crimea, to Black Sea for the holidays. And we spent all days just walking along the beaches and watching sunsets. As I was looking into the horizon and watching the sun going into the horizon, I can describe it as an infinity. I wanted to look into infinity and just remember that moment of love, of warmth of our family. And also, one thing that struck me was that about my mom was the hope that she had. She lived her last months like she had something beyond her life. There is something more to life. As a Christian, she believed that even if she dies, she will be in the presence of Jesus, of God. She will be in a place that was created and was promised by God. Eventually, my mom died 30th of October, and it was inevitable. Loss is inevitable. Loss is unnatural. The loss is a reminder to this world that it is not the way that it is supposed to be. We were all created to be happy, to live and enjoy life. We were created to laugh, work, to be healthy. But instead, we live in a broken world where we experience loss, rejection, hatred, death. So the question is, where did it come from? As a Christian, I find an answer in the Bible that says that God designed the world perfect. However, we people wanted to rule their lives on our own. Adam and Eve built happiness without God and disobedience to God. That led to the brokenness of the world, which we are part of. Does it mean all is lost? Is there any hope? I believe that there is a hope. The longing that we have for an ideal life reflects the God of life. God's plan was that to restore our broken life, to restore our lives. And he sent his son, Jesus Christ, into the world to do that. Jesus came to the world. He dwelt among people, among us. He experienced loss himself. He experienced loss of his friend and cousin. He experienced suffering, pain, grief, as we do in our world. And eventually he died. He died on the cross, taking all the brokenness, all the sin upon the cross, upon himself. I really like to quote the phrase of an astronaut that the greatest day in the history of humanity was not when a person landed on the moon, but when Jesus entered to this broken world to restore it through his death. Jesus not only died, but he also raised and he resurrected. And this brings us hope and joy that death and our loss is not the end. My mom had a complete assurance and hope that she will live in the presence of God after she dies. Very often when I came into her room, I saw her smiling and singing different Christian songs and praying to God. And that hit my heart because I knew that she had that assurance. As a Christian, it encourages me as well, because I know that the same powers that resurrected Jesus from death gives us the power to live on, to hope, and to know that we will unite with Jesus after we die. I'm really get encouraged by the book of C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. And I remember the last chapter, the last battle, and I find the words really satisfying. He says, "And as he spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion, but the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. And for us, this is the end of all the stories. And we can most truly say that they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story." I believe that the life after death, or if when we lose something, I know that there is the beginning of a real story for those who trust Jesus, who experience the same loss, the same pain as we do in our life. And I just want to encourage you that it is not all lost. There is more to that. There is more to life, and there is more to loss. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marina. That was beautiful to hear, and to think about your mother smiling and even singing as she was thinking about what she had in Jesus and all that meant for her in terms of hope and joy. Thank you so much for sharing. That was a real privilege to hear. Wonderful. Well, I hope you're enjoying this evening so far. And let me remind you that there's a great opportunity to ask questions even now, to type away on the comment section and ask any question you have. Marina will be around later to answer some of those questions. But now let me introduce our next speaker, Leah. Leah is a 34-year-old fintech lawyer based in central London. And Leah, it's such a joy that you're with us. We're looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. A few weeks ago, I saw a video on the news of a very bold and scantily clad ice skater from Amsterdam who unceremoniously fell face first into a canal when the ice underfoot gave way. Embarrassment aside, I very much doubt that his initial reaction was excitement about having to tread water until he was rescued. I expect he was grateful that the encounter wasn't worse, that he wasn't seriously injured. Many laughed at the video because it was clear that he was skating against the advice of the government, where there was a high possibility that the ice wouldn't be able to bear up under his weight. As I thought about this, I thought of our own lives where we find ourselves in situations that are not our fault, circumstances that we have not brought upon ourselves. And as we try to make sense of those, we may feel shock as we come to terms with what is happening around us. We know shocks like that by another name. We call it grief. And in my up close and personal encounters with grief, no one has died. Rather, it's the accumulation of unmet expectations, broken promises, silent, inescapable fears. Those all create grief. The absence of emotional support, a practical need that has been overlooked, a misunderstanding that causes you to feel isolated, an uncomfortable boundary, or the severing of a relationship. They all represent losses that propel any human into water that is too deep to tread. And so I can resolve that we all have experiences that shake us, that hurt us, that change us. For me, it was the combination of growing up in an unstable home, the unraveling that took place when my father decided that divorce was the only way to survive the aftermath of a relationship with my mother's mental health challenges. For me, it wasn't the numerous court cases or watching her go to prison or seeing her live a nomadic, homeless lifestyle that caused me grief. No, it was the loss of what I thought my family was, of who I thought I was, of any semblance of normality, of the presence and involvement in my life of people I thought I could rely on. It was the loss of my identity and the fear I had for my future, as my experiences taught me that things could only go from bad to worse to horrific. For me, grief was the loss of any form of stability and the fact that I didn't know how much any of it was affecting me. Even as recently as a few days ago, I've been sucked into a cycle of grief because I'm dealing with circumstances which, in some ways, would be more final if there was a death involved. Instead, I find myself wishing over and over and over again that the difficulty would pass. I long for decisions to get easier. I feel torn because I feel like I'm never fully living and never completely able to let go. And that's what I love about the Bible. It's so incredibly realistic about our experiences. Lamentations, a prophet from the Old Testament, writes about grief in a way that I found really apt. The writer describes times of affliction, times of darkness, of being enveloped and besieged by difficulty. Not always sunshine and roses, far from it, in fact. When I have been swimming in deep water for an uncomfortably long time, I'm exhausted, worn out from trying to fix things and clean myself up. Then I move from wondering what rescue looks like to becoming desperate. My endurance is starting to run out, and when I look around, I want to deny that any good can come from what I see. When, like the Dutch ice skater, we're at the end of our own efforts, we presume God is not listening and that he doesn't care. If he cared, why would I be in this situation? We think he is not interested in our plight and assume that any hope of rescue is futile. But the great news is that couldn't be further from the truth, because there is hope, not a mystical or cynical hope requiring you to cross your fingers or knock on wood. The Bible speaks of a hope that does not require us to deny our experiences, a hope that does not minimize or erase our losses, a hope that is unafraid of the realness and rawness of our human experiences. Lamentations chapter 3, verses 31 to 33 help us to see that there is hope. Let me just read those. God will not cast off forever, but though he cause or allow grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love, for he does not willingly afflict or grieve the children of men. I accept that these verses make some pretty huge claims. God does not willingly afflict or grieve the children of men. God is not pleased by our suffering. He's not like the crowds who watched the Dutch ice skater fall into the water, who laughed. God knows what our grief is because he's experienced grief personally in the person of Jesus. He knows intimately what it feels like. No one can understand grief more than Jesus did. He suffered at the hands of people who did not know him and who did not believe that he was God. And his suffering resulted in his death. Our suffering too, while different, results in a sort of death, the death of pride, the death of our self-sufficiency. And at the height of our need, the point we want to give up, God is able to provide compassion, to provide empathy, because he knows how we suffer. What I find really interesting about this passage is that God's answer is not to rescue us out of our circumstances, but to provide support, care, love, and to walk alongside us. These verses teach us that God has a steadfast, meaning an unchangeable love for the people that he has made. And that love is what allows us to suffer, even though it does not please him, and even though it's uncomfortable for us. God sees, God hears, God knows, and God witnesses. But what does all of this mean? How does this help us as we consider our own losses, our own longings? Well, we don't need to become less broken to be loved by God. We don't need to pretend that we have not been hurt to receive his compassion. He knows the intensity of each of our struggles personally. He's acquainted with what grief feels like, and he's offered to carry our grief, our burdens, our sorrows, our losses. His steadfast, unchanging love brings us through the pain of loss and longing so that we might know his faithfulness. And so I reckon loss feels a lot like falling into the ice water. What we most need in that split-second moment is not rescue. What the Dutch ice skater needed was confidence that he would be able to get out of the water and eventually reach a place of safety to regroup. The ice skater needed comfort. I hope it's not a disappointment to hear me say that my personal circumstances have not changed hugely over the past decade, but instead God has changed me. He has given me glimpses of his goodness. He has showed me that he cares for me. He has taught me to see joy in suffering, not in the experience itself, but in knowing that I'm not enduring it alone, that I have not been forgotten. So whilst I might not rejoice at the things causing my grief, in the midst of experiencing it, I am so grateful to know personally a God who has compassion for us in difficulty, whose love is steadfast and who cares for us. And the best part about it is that none of it depends on our circumstances.
Leah, thank you so much for sharing all that with us. I love that. Like, you're not out the other side. I mean, I don't love that you're not out the other side, but YouTube is full of TED Talks of people saying like, I went through this really hard thing, I'm over it now, and here's what I learned. And thank you for not having that story. Thank you for saying I'm still in the middle of it, but Jesus is enough. That's so encouraging. And yeah, really, really thank you for sharing. Our final speaker of the evening is the lovely Graham. So I did say at the beginning that if you don't call yourself a woman, you're still very welcome, and that still stands. Graham, you're representing mankind tonight with Niv. So welcome. And Graham lives in Wandsworth, where he serves with London City Mission. Graham, I will hand over to you.
Hey, thanks very much, Georgie. Great to be a representative of mankind, one small step for man. God is good in the midst of difficulty, and this has been a difficult year for a lot of us. Sometimes I feel like Paul, where Paul says, "I boast of I've been hard pressed, I've been beaten and whipped, but I still am persevering through that." Sometimes I feel like Job, boasting in the difficulties I've been through. I can tell you at the age of 7, my mum, who was a lovely Christian woman, my mum died. And to be honest, at the age of 7, I didn't really know what trauma was. It was a lad who'd just been bought a new moped, and he'd literally been bought it that day, and he didn't know how to turn a corner, and he went onto the pavement and banged into my mum, and and my mum died when I was 7. And then when I was 33, I'd been working in China, and my wife Alison and I came back. We're having a sabbatical. We were only back for a month, so we could give birth to our second child. It was a baby. Her name's Ruth, and pregnancy had gone pretty well in the last few weeks, and then Ali didn't really feel much, so we went into the hospital and were sitting there with the sonographer, and the sonographer's face, kind of, her eyes widened and she looked worried. We were like, "What?" And she said, "I just need to get a doctor." And the doctor is looking for a heartbeat, and we're starting to get stressed. He can't find anything. And then it's like, "Oh, I'm really sorry to tell you this, Mr. and Mrs. Miller. I'm afraid your child has died." And I'm thinking, "Oh my goodness, we've flown all the way from China. And the baby's died. She's meant to be born in 2 weeks, and then she's born there, and we hold her in our arms. She looks like our baby, but she's already gone to heaven. That's Ruth, our child." And then it's 3 years ago now that we came home, and our teenage son Harry, we found him at home, and he'd taken his life. We had no idea, but in fact the asthma medicine he'd been taking had psychiatric side effects, and he'd been really struggling, and it also made him paranoid and not wanted to talk about anything. And it was absolutely awful. And there's Alison and I, we'd poured out our lives for the Lord. I'd had a great career with a big multinational before that, and I'd given that up and become a missionary in China, and then I'd come back from that to head up London City Mission. And if there's meant to be a hierarchy, you kind of think, "Lord, we've done quite a lot for you, and in terms of loss, surely you're not trying to teach me something here, because I've lost my mum and I've lost a daughter already." And there is a moment of just utter heart-wrenching trauma and grief of a parent losing a child. That, to be honest, you don't want to over empathize with, because it is such a dark place. It's such a dark place. And yet, the Lord, of course, has been there. The Lord has been there. The Lord knows what it is to lose an oldest son. The Lord knows the pain of separation. And there are Bible verses that are there for the very, very darkest moments. And that's what I've found. And if you've been through darkness this year, or if you're going through darkness now, there is one who understands that there is nothing, there are no depths that you can plumb that take you beyond God, or even His word. These some of the nice songs that we sing, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. Let me tell you, a deer that's been chased across the desert in one of these kind of Hebrew hunting things, the deer is actually hyperventilating at this point. It's going it's an awful thing, actually. But when you're sobbing, there is a time of going that you actually can hardly catch your breath. You've been crying so much. And David knows that. He's lost the son he was meant to have with Bathsheba, and he's crying out to the Lord. He's in mourning and grief, and he knows what it is. He knows what it is to cry out to God, to long for God as a deer pants for water. He knows that. He knows it. And some of the Psalm 88, it's a very dark place, and yet I found it. I've actually found it in the days after Harry died, to know that verses like this are in the Bible, that it's okay to cry out to God, to feel bereft, and to be able to cry out to God, you have taken from me my friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. When you're kind of trying to find a crack in the bed where you can feel comfortable for a moment, and find a place of comfort, those verses are in the Bible. It's okay, because you see, God is a God of justice. And at times when there is no justice, when something awful has happened, it's all right, because God hates those moments too. We have a God who says, I looked for justice and I found bloodshed. I looked for righteousness and I heard cries of distress. And for the mother whose son has just been knifed to death on the street, God's right there with her. He thinks, this is disgusting, it's awful, it's horrible. And as she screams out, he's there screaming, it's awful. And there are verses in the Bible that talk about that kind of horror. And as Christians, I just want to encourage us not always to be there too quickly with with the encouraging word, Job's comforters were very eager to say, oh, well, I guess what's happening is probably because of your sin, something bad's happened to you. But, trust in God because he can forgive you still. And they're very quick to speak. And one of the more helpful things they did right at the beginning, if you look at Job chapter 2, it says, when they first arrived, Job 2, verse 13, then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. And then there's another 38 chapters of them pretty much, misusing the Bible at him. Most of what they say is true, but they misuse the Bible. And, I've had some of that. I've had people saying, Graham, I just wonder if there's some hidden sin in your life. Maybe these bad things have happened. Your mum died, your daughter died, and your sons died. I just wonder if there's some unrepentant sin. I'm thinking, you know what? There is all kinds of sin. There's all kinds of sin. And Jesus Christ has died for that sin. And I have hope. I have hope. God is there for the brokenhearted. He's very close to the brokenhearted. Psalm 34 tells us that. And when we go through difficulty, he is there. He's there. And at the end of that, at the end, he's still there. It's a long book. The book of Job is a long book, and grief can be a long process. We live in an instant society, so we want to give people pretty quick answers. It's a rather long book, and often there's a distance to go, and I will, if you're kind of looking for the day, I wonder how long it would take for Graham to get over a thing like that. I will tell you, here's the answer. It will take me the rest of my life. So it will take me the rest of my life. I will continue to be walking wounded until I die. And yet, God is doing a work in me. And yet, my job with London City Mission, I work with broken people all day long. And they don't need a guy in a shiny suit to kind of step off a plane and say, I have all the answers. They actually need someone who's broken to come alongside them. I've had social services investigate my family twice since the death of Harry. The people on the council estates who I work with have social services investigating them all the time. Makes me such a better person to serve them. But it's not a simple solution. But what God has, the answer God has given me is this, Isaiah 49, and it's an answer God gave Zion, his people, in the first place. Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me. The Lord has given up on me. The Lord has forgotten me. And it really feels like that. It felt like that. The night Harry died, it felt like that. And God says, can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Well, though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on my hands. I have tattooed you on my hands. And your walls are ever before me. And that is the relationship we have with God. It's a common thing in both depression and in grief. We feel completely isolated. We feel completely isolated, and we cry out and think we're alone. Actually, the hope we have is that we have a God who has experienced this, who knows it, and we're not isolated. He is absolutely there in the pit with us, and we are never, ever forsaken. We're never forsaken. But the evidence of our eyes, it looks like we're forsaken, but we're not. We're not. But we're tattooed on his hand. And sometimes it's helpful to know those things beforehand. Some of those verses from Lamentations, the steadfast love of the Lord never changes. His mercies are new every morning. We need to know those things sometimes before we get to the time of grief. I give thanks that those verses were memorized for me before Harry had died. And so I was able to bring them to mind. And it's don't be too quick. So the kind of Romans verses, all things work together for our good. Actually, I know that in my heart, and it is incredibly helpful for me. But for someone to say that to me the day after Harry's died actually comes across a bit crass. And I just encourage people to be careful with their kind of comforting. So I will leave it there.
Graham, thank you so much for what you shared. It's an extraordinary privilege to hear what you've been through and your honesty. And also for me personally, it's such a privilege to hear scripture opened up in a way that isn't superficial at all. I don't think I'll ever read Psalm 42 the same way, and that deer panting. So thank you so much. And thank you too to the other speakers, Marina and Leah. Now we're going to go into a time of Q&A. And I'm really excited about this. There's so much wisdom from our speakers. We've heard it in the talk so far, and there's plenty to talk about. So please be getting your questions down, be entering them on the questions, the comments tab, asking whatever you like that's been stirred from this evening. And I can see we've already got one question from Annika, which is wonderful. Georgie, can you see it? Do you want to ask that one?
I can see it. I can. Okay, so Annika says, thank you, all three of you. Such an encouragement to hear how God's been with you in the midst of loss. And her question is, how do you respond when friends and family, particularly those who do not know Jesus yet, get angry on your behalf at the injustice of your loss or your grief? So she hasn't named a specific person, so whoever has anything to say, just speak up.
I'll take this one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Such a great question. I think kind of to what Graham was speaking to, my trauma response is to deny the extent of the injustice. I often have a much more muted response to things that are going on in my life. And I'm grateful for friends and a community that remind me where an injustice has taken place. I think on that, there are two responses here. One is to the person who has caused the offence, and then one is your response to the way that you're dealing with the situation. And I think the first thing is, when you see that something is an injustice, then you know that a wrong has taken place. And then you can move to either forgive or to first express your response, your anger, your frustration, your being forlorn at the fact that this has happened at all. And then you can complete those feelings in respect of that other person. I think for me, what is most helpful is to remember that the injustice has been witnessed, not just by me in the situation, not just by the friend who's speaking into the situation, but that God has been with me in it the whole time. It's not a surprise to him. It hasn't escaped his notice. But I think for me, rather than focusing on the injustice, it's more about where to from here. How do I move through this in a way that means that I'm not defined by that injustice, in a way that I'm not taking on the identity of what has happened in that situation?
That's very, very helpful, Leah. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add? Sorry, Niv.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think, that's so great, Leah. Thank you. And I love how Anika's question is about that situation, maybe where even other people around you who don't share your faith are angry at God on your behalf. Does anyone want to chip in what you might say to someone who's cross at God kind of for you, perhaps even more angry than you are, or angry in different ways?
Oddly, it's not a bad start. It's actually quite a helpful place. The fact that people are feeling that. So for my non-Christian family to start thinking, no way, Graham's done so much for God, and God's let him down. I know it sounds crass, but you don't want to brush that off. It's actually really something worth engaging with, and not being simplistic about, to be able to set, because something in it is, but I thought God was good. And the fact that they thought God was good is a beginning, and I can go with that, and I can take them to the Bible and say, you know what, God hates this kind of thing happening, and this was, in a sense, this was never the plan. Just like I said, God hates it when kids are killed on the street. Let me say what he says about injustice, and let me tell you what plan A was, and then what happened, and I'm longing for the day at the end of Revelation when there'll be no more tears and no more of this. And yet, we live in this world where this kind of stuff happens, and little kids get leukemia, and that is awful. And the leukemia happens to Christians as well as non-Christians. The rain falls on the righteous and the non-righteous, and until he comes back. But I long for the day of him coming back. And anyway, so we have to engage with those things seriously. And it's basically, why do bad things, why is there suffering in the world? It's that apologetic question, but it's a really good question.
Thanks, Graham. Thank you. That was such a good question. Thanks, Anika. We've got another one that I can see from Ray, and I wonder if, Marina, I could direct this one to you. The question is, well, Ray says, thank you for sharing such personal accounts. You all seem sure in your faith. Did you have any doubts about who God was?
I don't know if the question was about if I had doubts about who God was during the period of suffering and during the period of loss. But many people would say doubts, it's bad, don't doubt. But if we never doubted, we would not find the truth or anything or answers on our life. So doubt is really great. And as I was a student, basically I was raised in a Christian family. I was going to church and I believed God exists. But as I was a student, I went to Singapore for a trip, and there is a variety of different religions there. So I was kind of very curious to get to know more of each one of it. And after that, I realized that there is no doubt that the Christianity is very unique, and the person of Jesus is very unique in the way that he shows the grace and love, and he's the only one who came into the world to find the way and to restore the broken world that we live in. So I do not have doubts. Though I had, during the suffering and experiencing the loss of mom, I had honest questions to God. Why me? Why it happened with me? If we are really good family, but as Graham also mentioned already, that that suffering and pain in the world is both for righteous and unrighteous. So all people are suffering in the world. And God does not choose whom to suffer, but He is the one who can give us the love, who can give us hope through the person of Jesus Christ.
Thank you, Marina. Leah, I'd like you to answer this next question, if you would. It's from Connie, and she says, how do you keep trusting God when it seems like He's forgotten you?
That's a really good question. I think we have a tendency to see things from our own perspective. I think we see the things that are happening to us with blinkers on, and it's really, really, really difficult to see the big picture. I think for me, it's only ever been a feeling that God has forgotten me. Intellectually, I know that He's promised, that He is involved in my life, that He cares for me, that He loves me, that He's near to me. But in dark times, when I feel forsaken, I think I have to just keep challenging Him. I think what ends up happening in practice is I become more honest. I say, look, you say that this is true about yourself. You say that you have not forgotten me. Where are you? Why are you not responding? Please give me a sense of you. Please draw near to me. Please would I know your comfort. And the marvelous thing about that is it's comes in such strange forms. It might be a friend coming alongside you, or an answer to a prayer that comes in a most unassuming way. But I'm always redirected to the truth that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And though I might feel differently about it because of my circumstances, whether they're going well or really poorly, the constancy of God is a great litmus test for my faith, because usually I'm the one with the issue. God's absolutely fine. And so I think, to your question, Connie, it's perspective and a mindset shift. And I really, really have to drill in. I have to wrestle. I have to say, this is what you say about yourself, but this is what you say about me. And if what you say about me is correct, and what you say about you is correct, then please change me. Please help me to know that you are who you say that you are, and please transform me into the image of your Son. So I think it's not a binary process of getting from A to B, but I think it is that constant engagement with how you feel, but what you know to be true, and to drill into that until you believe it.
That's brilliant. Leah, thank you. I'm loving these questions and answers. It's so good to hear what real faith sounds like. So thank you for that. We've got another question from Miles, and he's asked, how do you best walk with loss when it comes delayed, when loss and grief hit long after everyone else has moved on from it? And Graham, I wonder if I could direct that at you, but then perhaps afterwards others might want to chip in, Leah or Marina, if you have something to say as well.
Yeah, I think you have to still be honest about it. There is a British thing of stoicism, which this whole stiff upper lip thing, which it really isn't a particularly Christian thing. I know we're not meant to moan like the people in the desert as they did at Meribah, but the whole stiff upper lip and not crying thing isn't that's straight from the Greeks, not from the Bible. And so what can happen is something awful happens, and some people who are particularly extrovert, they really get on and grieve, and others kind of looking on in awe, thinking, wow, you're able to express yourself. And someone else, they're triggered later, but they've lost their chance and thinking, oh, I can't do it. And then because we have to stiff up the lip, you get someone, maybe it's Miles, who's thinking, oh, I've missed my chance now, and actually it's kind of embarrassing. Well, you know what? We have to just get on and express ourselves. And particularly as Christians, the Bible says, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. It is a privilege to be able to weep with those who weep, and it is a privilege to be able to rejoice with those who rejoice. And it's not, that also means that it's not a burden for us to go and say to our friend, I am actually finding myself bursting into tears sometimes when I get home from work and I really need someone to talk to. We need to be able to say that to people, and if our friend says that to us, we shouldn't just laugh it off and say ha 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 and come up with a bit of banter. We actually have to have proper Christian friendships where we say, oh man, I'm so sorry you're going through that. Tell me about it. And then let them tell you about it. And as they burst into tears, actually, man, we need to be able to feel some compassion for each other. And that's okay. That is okay amongst Christian men. This whole macho thing, sorry, I know this is for women, but that is okay for both men and women to cry at times when we're not meant to be crying. As I say, all this stoicism thing, that isn't from the Bible. It's from some Greek philosopher, and some of us need to repent of what we were taught at school. So there you go. That's my tuppence.
Might I follow that?
Yeah.
I think it really doesn't matter what other people's processes are. I think we as a culture are not good with grief, not just because of the stiff upper lip, but because it's Brits are culturally repressed emotionally. We're not taught, or certainly this generation, we're not taught to deal with emotions. And I think it therefore becomes a real challenge to let the process of grief complete with all of its waves. And it's not something that happens once and then you're done. And I think we have this assumption that, okay, well, I'll just push it down, and you know, time will pass and I'll feel better about it. But I can tell you, repression does not lead to freedom, and pain will always be an indication that something is wrong. And I've experienced this in the last 2 weeks. I've had personal circumstances in the past where things have happened, and I've fooled myself into thinking that was the last time that will happen. And then 3 years on, for example, my mum's just been arrested and sectioned, and it's like a play-by-play on exactly what happened 3 years ago. And so, to Miles's point, I thought I dealt with that. I thought I was over that. I thought I didn't need to deal with that anymore. And there's a huge strand of acceptance and space that I need to give to be able to come to terms with what I'm experiencing, not just in this moment, but where I want to be once I've moved on from this moment. And so I think we just have to learn to give ourselves grace. God gives us so much grace. It's available to us. All we have to do is take it. It is free. And so I think the other thing is we just need to go into a quiet place. It is a lonely place, but it is quiet, it is silent. We have to be naked before God, and we have to expose ourselves, our full selves, not the self that we're showing to everyone else whose processes are completing quicker than ours. But we just have to be honest with ourselves, as Graham was saying. But with ourselves, we have to be honest before God, and we have to say, this is how I feel. And until we do that, we will not be able to move through the process of grief.
Can I add something to the question?
Yeah, go for it, Marina.
First, what helps me when everyone forgets about the loss and they move on and I'm still with it. First, I've learned that I need to mourn enough to give space, to give time to that. Second, I've never thought that good sleep helps so much. And I realized that just to free my time and to give space just to sleep more than usual, it's really healing because it helps the body. Because when you are always constantly grieving and crying, it takes out of your energy and your thoughts, your heart, your emotions. Sleep more. And third, to surround myself with those who can grieve with me. In my case, it is my family who understand me most. But also, I realized even though we've lost the same mom, like my father lost his wife, our paths are different. Our suffering is different. And we need to realize that only God alone can understand us completely, because the reactions and the moment of grief or wave of emotions is coming in different times to each one of us. So and the realization that God is always with me and I can turn to Him and cry to Him is really helping me to move on.
That's great.
Yeah, a lot of wisdom in those answers. Thank you, all three of you. I think we've perhaps got time for definitely one more question, which is from Tulasi, who says, what role did prayer play during your grieving? I'll throw that out since it may be the last question and everybody gets a fair chance.
Oh,
don't be polite. Go on, Graham.
Right. I think whenever really hard times come, I tend to pray more. So through grief, I found myself praying a lot more, and that it's one of the healthier bits of grief that, in terms of perspective giving, I've found myself feeling weaker and more dependent on God, and pretty much got to a point of thinking, oh Lord, I am completely helpless here. I just need you, and coming up with almost prayers of desperation. But that I found that a very helpful place to be, because God has somewhat taught me, you know what? You were always pretty incapable, Graham. You thought that you were quite talented, but in fact, this was all me. And it was all me all along. It's only now that you've really got the hang of this thing. And so, yeah, grief and prayer has been helpful. It's one of the learning things for me. And I've taken that kind of out of the grief process and kept it help my prayer life. So there you go.
I will all honestly say that in my case, it was physically very hard to pray. And I was like, Marina, are you a Christian? You need to pray. Why you don't pray? But I physically couldn't pray. But then I realized that even if the prayer of the heart or, of the thoughts when you turn to God is also prayer. And I know that, when we pray, even in our hearts or mind, it's like very transformational process. First, because the recognition of your weakness is a power. You kind of give a space to God to work in your heart and heal to heal that process of loss. So yeah, prayer is really powerful, even though it comes not by your mouth but from your heart and just your thoughts.
I think in addition to personal prayer, the thing that has kept me the most going, has been the prayers of others. And, I've had friends who have called me up and have prayed with me on the phone just to remind me what it looks like to have somebody who really loves you praying on your behalf. I've had people write emails to confirm that they're praying, to kind of just remind you that you're not alone in your process and you're not alone in what you're asking for. Because when you're grieving, you're asking God the same things over and over and over again, and you don't necessarily have the visibility to see the ways in which he's answering or the ways in which he's responding. But the more both outward looking you are in that process, not just for yourself, but for others, and the more you let other people into that so that they can speak in on your behalf, the more encouraged I have found myself, because I've known that even when I don't have the right words to ask for what I most need, I know that there's an army of people who are behind me praying on my behalf.
That's great. Well, I think that is unfortunately all we've got time for questions wise, but I do just want to say a huge thank you to you, Graham and Leah and Marina, for sharing so deeply and honestly, and for answering the questions, because it's not easy being on the spot and you don't know what question. I mean, people could have literally asked you anything tonight and you would have had to answer. So thank you for being willing to really put yourselves out there.
And thank you as well to our amazing tech team. Thank you to Beth and Jaida, who behind the screen, off stage, have been putting all of this together so that we can be heard and seen and we could hear these amazing stories. So thank you guys, you've been amazing. Yeah, we want to let you know as well before we go about some upcoming Passion for Evangelism events. So there is a book club on, now I'm careful how I say that because I say book club, whereas most of you watching probably would call it a book club. But whatever you want to call it, it's happening on the 29th of March at 7:30 on Zoom. And the book is If Only by Jenny Pollock. Now, I know Jenny, she's a colleague and friend of mine, and I can vouch that her writing is golden. It's just so good. And the book that she's written is her first one, and I think it's going to be the first of many. She's a brilliant writer, and it's all about finding joyful contentment in the face of lack and longing, and what is it like to be in that place of saying, if only I had this, then everything would be fine. If only this situation was sorted, then everything would be good. And so this Zoom meeting is your chance to meet Jenny yourself and chat through the book with others and with her. What day is it now? The 22nd? The 23rd, and it's on the 29th. So if you can read it in 6 days, then go for it. And also in April, there is the Passion for Evangelism Wonder Conference, the 16th to the 17th. The speakers Alison Williams and Kaz Dodds, and the price is £35, or if you're a student or unwaged at the moment, then it's £20 for you. And that includes a goodie bag, admission to the conference, obviously, mentoring,
and lots more. So to book, or if you just want a bit more information, you can go to pfe/women.squarespace.com, and I'm hoping that link will, oh, there you go, it's at the bottom of the screen, so go on there to find out more. And if you do want to know anything else about Passion for Evangelism, then you can look at Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, the blog, all the socials, and I'm sure that they will be either coming across the bottom of the screen or put in the comments as well. There they are, right on cue. What a tech team. And I think that is all from us, Niv, isn't it? Unless you have any final remarks you'd like to make.
Only that I think tonight's been brilliant, and a huge thank you to everyone, and thanks to you, Georgie. It's been great.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for watching at home. We hope you've enjoyed it, and do get in touch with Passion for Evangelism if there's any questions that you have following this event. But have a lovely National Evening of Reflection.